Welcome everyone to this TechNet webinar on the verification and traceability of COVID-19 vaccine. Today we are delighted to welcome speakers from WHO, UNICEF, Vitalwave, and Rwanda FDA. Before we start, please note that this webinar is being recorded and the link to the video, as well as the presentation, will be shared by email to everyone who registered. During this session, feel free to ask your questions to our panelists by typing them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of this presentation. This webinar is interpreted in French as well. In order to listen to French language, please click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and then select French language. Feel free to mute the original audio in order to listen to the interpreter only. I am now going to give the floor to Anita Sands from WHO, who will start with the presentation. Anita, over to you.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. I hope you can all hear me well. My name is Anita Sands and I work in the Department of Regulation and Pre-Qualification at WHO headquarters in Geneva. And I work in the team that deals with substandard and falsified medical products. So we cover medicines, vaccines, and medical devices, including IVDs. And I'm responsible for the work that we have on traceability of medical products and support to member states. Next slide, please. So I'm going to walk you through some of the normative guidance that we have to support countries who are embarking upon the thought and maybe the implementation of a national traceability system. But I think it's pretty clear that the COVID-19 epidemic has shone a spotlight on why supply chain integrity and pharmacovigilance and other aspects which a traceability system is useful for are really important. And this document was actually produced and published pre-COVID, but I think it still stands as a really useful benchmark of what is traceability and what would we recommend in terms of WHO's approach. Next slide, please. So it's pretty clear that there are opportunities, but there are also challenges for traceability. I would think one of the main challenges really is the finances, and that this does cost money, but there are enormous opportunities and different ways in which the health system as a whole can benefit from traceability when it's well implemented and working properly as it should. It can actually prevent the entry of falsified products into regulated supply chains. It can detect falsified products, even if they do manage to gain entry. It can enhance patient safety through the better capacity for market recalls and withdrawals. It can improve supply chain efficiency by minimizing wastage and improve supply chain visibility to reduce stockouts and shortages. So you see it goes there right the way across some of those regulatory aspects, prevent, detect and respond to substandard and falsified medical products, but also around having a healthy and well-functioning supply chain. So it's really a win-win situation in terms of both access to testing, access to vaccines, and ensuring that the vaccines are safe and of good quality. But undeniably, it does require quite a resource investment, so both financial, human, but also from a technological point of view. It's very easy to think that traceability is just about putting a barcode on a product, but really it's much more than that. It's about making sure that there is a data collection system that underpins the data that is coming into the system, and when you decommission barcodes or products when they're actually used. And that's what makes the system work well, is when everybody that has the product in their chain of custody understands why traceability is important so they can fulfill their role. It's also really important to note that generally SF vaccines don't really know where borders of countries are. And so it's really important that national traceability systems are actually interoperable between countries, and often that means between systems, to be able to track where products are going when they're leaving certain countries. Obviously, data security is always a challenge which we have to keep at the forefront of our minds when we're dealing with such a level of metadata. Sustainability. We know that there are many implementing partners that are really encouraged by the idea of traceability and want to support countries to implement it. But we need to make sure that it's done in a sustainable way so that it is actually something that can be perhaps used even across the entire health system. Let's say we start with COVID-19 vaccines, but can it also be used in medicines and medical devices? And I think that's really where the cost benefit and the benefits across the entire health system become really easy to see. I talked a bit about data security, but also data governance issues can be very complex around who owns the data, who should have access to the data, and very much knowing that industry is part of this discussion. And also the idea that, yeah, it's a pretty fragmented environment that we work in, a lot of implementing partners with a lot of interest, but also maybe a lot of different interests as to why they might be part of traceability. So it's a bit of a complex web to navigate. Next page, please. So in terms of the different types of traceability systems, I think maybe some people might think of the full track and trace system as being, you know, the ultimate nirvana where we really want to get to. But there are many systems that you could have along the way to what we call a full track and trace system, where you're able to verify exactly where a product is in the supply chain and where it has been. So every change of ownership. But there are also other systems such as a point of dispense verification, where products are only verified at the point of dispense or of use, or let's say where they're used in an immunisation campaign. There are other systems where patients themselves will directly verify the product that's in their use. This perhaps relates a bit more to medicines and to medical devices that are used for self-testing, probably less likely to be used for vaccines, but nevertheless, it is certainly a type of traceability that we've seen many private sector companies find innovative solutions. They're constantly coming to us and saying, hey, I've got this great new innovation where you send an SMS and I'll tell you if this product is authentic or not. And so this authentication of product is something where we're seeing a lot of interesting developments, but we're talking about the whole scope. Next screen, please. So there are a number of use cases, but I personally today will just focus on the first three. And in fact, Lisa will actually take more of the third one. I'll talk mainly about the use cases around prevent, detect, and respond to substandard falsified medical products, and how you can enhance corrective actions, which is removing products from the market through a recall. But obviously, supply chain integrity, security of strategic products, and not to mention pharmacovigilance and reimbursement for public health insurance are also other important ways in which a traceability system can be used. Next slide. So in terms of what does WHO have as resources that can support member states who want to embark on the journey of traceability systems, we have a member state mechanism, and that's a fairly high order of governing body type of meeting that we have, or it's a mechanism. So we meet as well as we exist as a network, where one of the most important aspects of, and I have here a link to where all our documentation is, but it's really about promoting effective collaboration amongst member states. And we really think that traceability is quite an important aspect that member states need to work together on. And it was actually one of the identified priority activities of the member state mechanism, which is how I got to be involved. Actually, as I'm in the team that works with this member state mechanism, there was an entire working group on traceability, and I happened to be appointed to coordinate that work. Next slide. So what you'll see is that one of the most important things we've been able to produce is the WHO policy paper on traceability of medical products. We also run the WHO Global Surveillance and Monitoring System for substandard and falsified medical products, where if you were to detect a suspected falsified COVID vaccine, for example, you could report it through our what we call the GSMS, Global Surveillance and Monitoring System. We also have some pieces of work that Lisa will talk about more, which is about the WHO position on barcodes, QR codes, and vaccine vial monitors in the context of COVID-19. and also the work that she's doing on notification systems for shortages of COVID vaccines. So I think what you can see here is we have this normative guidance that's really aimed at being able to apply to all medical products, medicines, vaccines, and medical devices, but then also subsets of work that are very linked to COVID-19. And the fact that, unfortunately, we have seen a number of falsified COVID vaccines that have been circulated amongst many member states during this past 2.5 years. In terms of the key takeaways, next slide, please. The normative guidance talks about establishing governance systems, having costing systems and sustainability, and using internationally recognized standards. I just want to note that WHO does maintain a neutral position across the different data standards. We do not recommend one data standard over another. Next slide. I realize I'm over my 7 minutes, so I'll quickly speed up. The global surveillance and monitoring system is about having focal points in national regulatory authorities that can help respond to any authentication or verification failure that you might detect as part of a traceability system. They can also support you to quarantine suspect products, to collect evidence so that for enforcement purposes, and also to help issue alerts for increased surveillance to make sure that traceability and increased verification can happen. Next slide, please. I already mentioned that we certainly have had many cases of substandard and falsified COVID-19s in the regulated supply chain for a whole variety of reasons. We've issued 3 separate alerts, but what we notice is that one of the main drivers is improper disposal of empty vials. So vials were not discarded properly after they were used for COVID vaccine. So they were retrieved from the waste disposal, they were refilled, and they were used. So the vials looked correct. The label was the same label, but just the new lids had been put on, they'd been filled with water. Next slide. And now I'll just pass over to Lisa to talk a little bit about some of the other activities related to supply chain. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anita. I just want to do a sound check and see if you can hear me.
We hear you perfectly.
Thanks so very much. I won't use my camera today only because I have a bit of a limited bandwidth. And so I really want to thank Anita for giving that fantastic overview. And what I wanted to do was actually give you an example of something that we're working on, because I think when we talk about this in theory, and I think, again, Anita did a great job of telling us that there's all kinds of assumptions that people might make. It can be pretty interesting to take a look at a real live example and see, where this actually goes. Next slide. So what I want to do is hone in on the example of what we've been doing in the space of COVID-19. So for those of you who might not know, the ACT Accelerator is a partnership that supports access to, so ACT stands for Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerated. So ACT-A is what it's called. So what I wanted to do is 2 things. One is just to tell you a little bit about it. And the purpose of the ACT Accelerator is to bring vaccines, treatments, diagnostics, and other tools to support countries, and particularly those with unmet needs. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a just some links to documents here, and I want to spend the majority of my time actually on a different slide, which we're going to talk a little bit about the case of barcodes, traceability systems, and how that impacts vaccines. And so again, you've got some links here, some web links, and I want to just bring your attention to the second one because I think it's probably the most interesting in this context. This is the link that takes you to the document where WHO gives. It's a working document. In other words, it's not a formal guidance. It's a guidance document that we issue during a pandemic, and it's going to be subject to change. So it's something that if you look in that space, you may see a different document. Right now, it's been relatively stable. We haven't moved away from the recommendation, but the details are actually on that web link. And I'm going to go over a couple of the details of what this looks like in practice with the COVID vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccines. So let's just jump to the next slide. So I'm going to spend the majority of my time actually on this slide. And I'm going to first just give you a bit of a summary of what the WHO recommendation actually is. and also talk a little bit about some of the challenges with different types of data matrix codes. Not all data matrix codes do the same thing, and that's something that I think we see a lot. So what you'll see there is we talk about the packaging level, and we talk about whether it's traceability or what we call a QR code. So I think the one recommendation that you'll see from WHO right now is that we do recommend putting 2D data matrix, what we call barcodes, or things that capture the same information on secondary packagings of vaccines. So that's a bit different than what someone might think. There's no recommendation at the present to include barcodes actually on the vaccine vial. So when we make these recommendations, some of the things that are important to consider are costs. And so when you manufacture a vaccine, any changes that you make to a label actually have a cost. Most of you have seen a vaccine vial. It's quite small. There's not very much space on that vial. And so adding a barcode is going to compete with some of the other information. So it's important to remember that information on a vial, some of it is statutory. It's required that it be there. And so there's been a lot of discussion back and forth with two different things. One, in traceability, can we use these? Could we make better use of information about the vaccine if we had the barcode right there on the vial? If we could find a way to work a space for it on the vial, what would it actually do for us? So there's some ongoing work to look at the costs and the benefits of what would happen if we tried to put the barcode right there on the vaccine vial. One of the challenges that we know exists is that in the countries that are supported by the ACT-A partnership in this particular instance, many of them don't have traceability systems. Some have traceability systems that are just starting. Some actually have made quite a bit of progress, but there are a large number of countries that don't have any type of a traceability system at all. So when we talk about it, we're talking about vaccine vials. And I think Anita's point is an important one, that we can't make 5 different systems. We can't make one traceability system for vaccines, another one for medicines, and so on. It really does need to be a national system that has some flexibility and adaptability to accommodate different things. So again, one of the key challenges of considering putting barcodes on the vaccine vial is really the limited capacity that a country has. And as Anita pointed out, it's not just about putting the barcode there. It's about actually having a data system and a data governance model behind it so that those data can actually be used in an effective manner. It's not a passive system. It's something that actually has to be managed. So I'm just going to go through a couple of things, because we have both the traceability, which is the 2D data matrix code, and we also have QR codes. QR codes are passive. They're not data in, data out. It's going to just take you to a website with some information. So there is some interest, and particularly from industry, in replacing label and packaging leaflets with QR codes. So that's a subject that's still open to discussion. There hasn't been a recommendation made by WHO on that product, but what we can say is that we have not reduced the statutory requirements of what must be on a label and readable to the human eye. So a barcode for someone who doesn't have a means to read it is not very helpful. And similarly with the QR code, if you put, for example, your expiration date in a QR code, if you don't have any way to read it, you don't have access to the information. So there are always going to be information that will be statutory on the label and that have to be readable by the human eye. So that's just going over a little bit the difference between those two. So primary packaging right now, we don't have enough information on the benefits and costs of doing that, particularly for low and middle income countries. And with the QR codes, again, that's an open subject, but at no point will a QR code take the place of all information on the label. I do also want to go back to the question of data, because once you have data from a barcoding system, when you look at the chain of custody of the product, the chain of custody of the data tends to follow the product. So in the first instance, the manufacturer owns what's on that barcode. They own that data. They have to decommission it and they have to move it into the next system. So the next procurement agency might own the data at that point. And somebody else might own the data as it changes custody once it moves into a country supply chain system. So having a system, a global system, is something that's been also discussed. Could we for certain essential medicines, priority products, could we actually have a global database? And so that's also a long-term discussion. It's a big debate. And some of the big questions are really about which medicines, what's the scope, what's the data governance, and I think there's some pretty complicated legal questions here about data ownership as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here, but I thought it would be useful to just give you an example of a particular question about barcodes on a particular product in a particular context, so that you can see a bit the evolution of how we work with these different kinds of systems and their evolution. So I want to thank Anita, and I want to thank our organizers, and I'll pass back over to you. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you very much. We will go now into the section on traceability and verification of health products. I'm going to be presenting the initiative, and Max and Edouard will continue with the rest of the presentation. So we are short on time, so I'll try to go quickly over the verification and traceability initiative. The initiative has several goals. The first one is to enable countries to manage the risk of falsified health products or diverted health products, so health products that are supposed to be in one country and end up being in another country. The initiative wants to support long-term establishment of these national traceability and supply chain visibility systems that my colleagues were talking about. And right now we have a focus on COVID-19 vaccines, but the idea, and we're going to be doing this very quickly, is to expand to other health products with exactly the same technology. And what you're going to be hearing about from us today is a system that is going to allow us to do all the things that I pointed out. That is called TRVST. We pronounce as trust. It's a traceability and verification system. And basically, you will see soon a repository of health product data, as well as some tools to verify and track health products across the supply chain. A quick overview on the initiative. This is a multi-stakeholder effort. It has a governance structure. There is the steering committee, and there you see the key organizations that are leading the initiative: Gavi, UNICEF, USAID, the World Bank, Global Fund, the Gates Foundation, and also Rwanda and Nigeria, which have been from the very beginning pushing this initiative forward. We have a program management unit that I lead as part of the Vitalwave support to this whole initiative. And then it has a set of task teams that manage the technical aspects, the country deployment, as well as the data and legal aspects of the project, of course, with all this sensitive information. UNICEF is the manager of the contract with the vendor, the solution provider, and Max will talk a little bit more about that. And just to point out that beyond Rwanda and Nigeria, we're starting to have interest from other countries, such as Nepal and Malawi and others with whom we have conversations, who are interested in incorporating the trust system into their supply chains. So with that, I will pass it on to Max to give a more detailed overview on the traceability and verification system. Max, over to you.
Thank you very much, Enric. My name is Max Kabalisa. I'm the supply chain manager within UNICEF Supply Division in Copenhagen, and I look after digitalization and the traceability initiatives within UNICEF Supply Division in Copenhagen. So I'm really happy to be part of the team today. And Enric, please move to the next slide. All right, thank you very much. I just want to give an overview of the trust system that Enric have just mentioned. And I'm glad that this system aligns quite very well with the presentation our colleagues from WHO have also mentioned. So it has both the use cases that were mentioned and as well as we are facing similar challenges that were outlined by our colleagues from WHO. So the system has 5 basic elements, which is an interface to manufacturers, the trust repository, which holds the data. I'll come to that as we move on. And of course, we have verification smartphone and an application programming interface, which supports the interface between the repository and the mobile app. And obviously, we do also have trust as a system-to-system connection via an application programming interface. Next. Yes, the standard interface to manufacturers, which I have just mentioned, it supports the connection between manufacturers' system and the trust itself, whereby the manufacturers can upload both the product master data, batch number, and the serialized pack data into the trust repository. Next slide. The next part that we just mentioned is the repository itself, which holds all product data and the event data, that's verification and traceability, to ensure that all these data are kept in a secured repository, and then it can facilitate the data exchange between the tools that are used to verify the product pack. So I would say that the repository can be scaled to any size as the scope and of course the growth of other countries that will be buying into this. So we have the trust has capabilities to be able to scale up and include additional functionalities or additional modalities that can be used to verify the authenticity of products. I'll come to details about the existing capabilities now in terms of verification modalities. The third part is a smartphone application, which actually supports both Android and the OIS versions. So you can verify either using an Android telephone, or you can also use an OIS phone, or even any other scanning device that can also be using any of those 2 versions. So once the data is, hold on. So the data, once you scan the packaging, so it sends information to the repository, and then it does the verification, whereby you can also have this the scanning results on your mobile, and then you can check the results of the scan. Next. The next important aspect to this is an application programming interface to any national traceability system. We do understand that some of the countries might have a traceability system, and so it's important that the trust can be able to interface and address any challenges related to interoperability, as Ariariza said. And so this will help, will be done by an API, which can be built, and then you have a system-to-system connection. Next. The last part is a dashboard. Of course, we have the dashboard that allows the events to be viewed depending on the access you have on the dashboard, because it's designed in such that it's based on the access and the privileges that you might have on the system. Then you can be able to view the verification events. And so I want to highlight that the access is restricted to individuals based on the role they play with the different organizations. Next. So so far we have listed the 4 different modalities you can use to verify the authenticity of products. The first one is a national application issued by a trust. This comes automatically with the trust system. So this is a mobile application whereby you just download it, either, as I said earlier, you can download it if you're using Android mobile phone. So you download this from the Apple Store, from the Google Store. And also you can, if you're using an ISO phone, such as Apple phone, you can also download this from the app, and then you can scan the pack and then sends information to Trust, and then you can get the results of your scanning. The second one is similar to the A, which I have just mentioned. This is the same, but with the difference that it can be customized to include country logo and of course the languages that are used in that particular country, and so that you can call out similar scanning functionalities as modality A. Modality C will be more of an API interface to a national developed application or any national system that they might have. We do understand that some of the countries have had already some initiatives like national product catalogs, which also have some mobile applications that were developed. And so we developed a link between those so you can have the communication via national application system. And the last one, but not the least, is the modality D, which is an interface that is built between system to system in case the country has a national traceability system. Next. So important is to mention what type of data that we correct when we are doing verification. So the verification takes a minimum amount of data, which are required actually to support the verification of authenticity of the product. And so when we look at the data we correct, it's purely related to the product itself. There is no information that is corrected there which is relevant maybe to individuals or to track any of their movements. So we don't do that. And so the app is built with the terms of use. Of course, you have to agree to those terms and conditions. But of course, these terms and conditions are well designed to ensure that you're protecting the integrity of the data and also taking into consideration the data policies that were established between all parties that are involved in this system. Just to say that, of course, when we correct information, maybe another pertinent information that I want to highlight here is the geolocation of the actual scan. So this data maybe that would be related to where the scanning is taking place. So it's important that you understand where the scanning is taking place, such that someone might not be sitting in a different places and they start just doing scanning of particular pack and confuse the information and send a confusing information to the system. So we do track exactly where the scanning is taking place. So the data is not made available to public and is kept in secure. And of course, I want also to bring this to the question that Aria, I think it's Riza. No, it's Anita. So the question related to data policy and the data sharing. So we do establish actually the data sharing protocols with both manufacturers and the users of the system. So we make sure that we tackle thoroughly issues related to data sharing, and we have had an agreement signed between manufacturers and the users of the system to make sure that there is an integrity in terms of use of data. Next. Important that also I mentioned the solution provider. The solution provider is a company called SolidSoft Reply. It's a UK-based company. And this is one of the largest companies that have been in this business. And so it has more than 10,000 employees worldwide, and it operates a network model of over 130 companies. And so this is a similar company that have significant experience in verification of authenticity of pharmaceutical products, and the same company that builds the European Medicines Verification System, commonly known as EMVO. And the EMVO has over 1,100 manufacturers connected to it. And so they do manage approximately 250,000 products, and they do a scanning of close to 10 billion packs per year across 26 European countries. And so the trust will benefit from being built on the same secure platform as the same as EMVO. Next. So we have gone through different phases to be able to establish and build this system as to where we are today. And so the phase one, which is where we are right now, it's just we are operating a trial with the partner countries in order to learn how the trust performs in a real world situation to verify COVID-19 vaccines. So the learning from phase one will be taken forward into production phase, in which that we can actually learn from this trial phase and then establish a full track and trace system that also will be integrated with the national existing systems where they have. And of course, when we think of phase two, we will be bringing in new verification tools, additional products beyond COVID-19. We're looking for antiretroviral drugs, antimalarials, and any other essential medicines that are of importance for verification purposes. And of course, we're expecting to have more countries joining in. Next. All right. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any question you may have. Over to you, Edouard. Thank you.
Edouard, I'm not sure if you're talking now. We are not hearing you. Perhaps you're muted.
Okay. Yes, sorry about that. Yes. So thank you very much, Max. Thank you very much, Enric. I want to give you the situation of Rwanda as one of the country who is who has started the deployment of trusts. Next, please. So the implementation of the trust is led by Rwanda FDA, is done through Rwanda FDA. Rwanda FDA is the regulatory authority which is in charge to protect the public health through the regulation of human and veterinary medicines, vaccines, and biological products, medical devices. But we also regulate other products such as food products and others. And the main, the core functions of the regulator that we are is through the product assessment and registration, inspection, licensing, pharmacovigilance, safety monitoring, and clinical trials. Next. So every time that we have a new initiative in the country or in the authority, we always have to go back to look into what our policies say, to have a little bit of backup in terms of explaining for easy implementation of whatever initiative that we want to bring into the country. So when we realize that there's a trend for track and trace of pharmaceutical products, as a country, we want to include this component of traceability in what we do already as a regulator when we're trying to protect, to improve the quality and safety of the products. And looking back into our policies and National Pharmaceutical Strategic Plan, we realized that we're already talking about the enforcement of quality assurance system to ensure the safety and effectiveness, efficacy of the products. But we also emphasized on using of new technologies that would help us to do the task. And then we realized that the gap was already emphasized, that we have a problem to assure the quality of the product through the value chain, to improve the data accuracy, data capture efficiency in supply chain operations. And one of the interventions that was already proposed at the time was the implementation of global standard for product identification and data capture. So for us, it was a good start that will back up the new initiative of pharmaceutical traceability, and we were good to go. Next, please. So why we're talking about global standard, why we're looking about global standard is because even though we have a national identification and classification structures, we understand that to interact with external trading partners, there's a need to speak a common language. So in Rwanda, we have these global standards. We enable us to we enable the interoperability across disparate systems, and that would be like a reference code to associate with items or products across different stakeholders. Next one, please. So the first step now was to have a strategy. So we put in place, we brainstormed, we invited stakeholders, we invited experts in traceability to draft a national vision and strategy for the traceability. The main objectives of this strategy is to decrease the presence of substandard and falsified medicine, to assure the quality of and efficacy of pharmaceuticals, to promote the trust in pharmaceutical sector, to provide visibility of product across the supply chain, to create supply chain efficiencies from manufacturer to patients receipt, and increase patient safety. This is a document that was drafted in 2019, and it had different activities that would help us to implement the global standard for traceability and to establish a traceability system in the country. Next one, please. So we have there are complementary approaches to achieving a safe and secure supply chain, and one is through verification to ensure that the item that can be the identification, the validity of the item through identification, and the other one is the traceability, full traceability, where we want to know where the product is through the tracking system, but at the same time we want to know the journey of the product through the entire supply chain. For us as beginners in the implementation of these traceability systems, we start, our journey start by the verification, but we are leading towards the full traceability of the pharmaceutical product. Next one, please. So now we're talking about our roadmap for traceability of COVID-19 vaccines. We got lucky when this was in discussions that we had already something that we were putting in place in terms of a traceability system. We had our national system that we were building, and we were able to welcome this initiative for COVID-19 traceability. And then today we have started the trial of the trust system, the system that have been explained. I think you've been in different presentations that we have different models. So today we have started the trial of the modality A of the trust system. So the learnings of and the experience from this trial will be used to now connect these trust, the global repository, with our national system, which will be to integrate the trust verification capability into the Rwanda national application. That will be another modality, which is going to be the modality C, as explained in the previous presentations. Of course, our goal is to go up to the full traceability. That will be able to include now not only the global repository with our national repository, but we also want to include our transactional systems, systems that are being used in the supply chain operations. So in the next slides, next slide, please. Yes, so in this next slide, we want to discuss a bit about the modality C. That's where we are heading. With this modality C, we want to have to be able to connect following the what we have seen, what we have learned in modality A. So this national product catalog application will be updated to be able to use the trusts, to integrate the trusts application. So the national product catalog, the NPC, will validate the information from the national product catalog, which is the first phase. But we also want to give it the option of having this NPC mobile application to be able to validate the information in the trust repository. And the information that we have in the trust repository will include the batch number and the serial number. Next one, please. And after implementing the modality C, we want to go, our ultimate goal is to evolve into having a full traceability capability within Rwanda, increasing supply chain visibility, reducing the risk of falsification, increasing the supply chain efficiencies. And also here we present two ways of doing this. We want to, obviously, we still have a mobile application that will be used to validate the scan against Rwanda National Product Catalog, but we also want to be able to validate the batch number and serial number against Rwanda supply chain operational systems. For example, we have the ELMI systems, the ELMI system that has information about the operational system. And this one, we want to be able to validate the batch number, serial numbers with our national product catalog mobile application against the ELMIs. And that's what we have to present about the situation from Rwanda. Thank you, and welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Edouard, for this presentation. So it seems like we do not have any question yet from our participants. So I would like to remind you that if you have any question for our panelists, feel free to type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. In the meantime, I am going to remind all the participants that you will receive the link to the recording and presentation by email at the end of this webinar series. So we're going to wait for a few more seconds to see if our participants have any question or if any of our panelists would like to share a final word. All right, so no questions. Oh, I can see. Oh, a question here from Abdullahi, who is asking, is the trust application, can the trust application be used in offline mode after you downloaded it? Thank you for this question.
Yes, it's a, thank you very much, Abdullahi, for the question. Yes, it is possible you can use the app after you have downloaded it, and it works quite perfect both offline and online. And today we were lucky we had the test in Rwanda, and indeed it worked in both ways. Over.
Thank you, Max, for clarifying this. And I see in the chat another question from.
Sorry, Geraldine, just
Yeah,
I wanted to add only,
of course.
this is something that Edouard was mentioning during the presentation, but maybe the people didn't realize that it was actually today that it was done the trial. So Edouard and the team was testing this the app this morning also with the offline modes and so on. So this is pretty much coming out of from the oven today, and it's good news for, it's an important milestone for trust. Over.
Thank you, Enric, for this further information. I can see another few questions in the chat, for example, from Emmanuel asking, how are you tracking and tracing locally manufactured products?
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Let me just maybe clarify a few things before we move ahead. Trust has two capabilities, but which is verification, and they obviously wanted to get it to track and trace. So the current version that we are operating, it is working on verification. But any verification that we do, obviously you have to understand that the verification is a comparison of the information you scan on the barcode from the pack, which sends information to comparison with the information that is already uploaded in Trust. And so when it comes to working with the local manufacturers, there won't be any problem. What's important is working with the local manufacturers so that they can be able to upload the information as much as other manufacturers can upload the information in the Trust. And so once you have uploaded the information, that's the master product data of your particular product. And so if it's in a Trust, then you can do the verification. And of course, our second phase, which we are going to have a full track and trace, then we will have built also interfaces that would support tracking forward and tracking backward, and so it's possible. So the answer to your question is yes, tracker can be also, Trust can also be able to track the locally manufactured products. I don't know if my colleagues, maybe Enric or Edouard, you want to have something added on this? Over.
Nothing to add. Maybe just related to this question around locally manufactured and so on. There's a benefit of using Trust across countries, because you can, if you're Rwanda, even though you cannot see the information that's coming from Nigeria, say, you do get all the alerts that have to do with products that have been scanned in Rwanda. So for example, if you have a product that you scan in Rwanda and was supposed to be in another country because it was scanned there, and there's no, that creates an alert because it's a suspicious activity, even though you're not seeing what happens in your neighboring country or any other country as far as you want to go, you do get the alert because you have inconsistencies there in products supposedly being in two places when that should not happen at the point of dispatch. Over.
Thank you very much for this explanation. And I can see another question since we have a few minutes left. Do we know if there are any experiences from the use of the app in Nigeria?
I'm happy. Oh, go ahead, Max.
Go ahead, no problem.
Okay. No, thank you for the question. We are working with Nigeria to do a similar trial as we've done today in Rwanda. So that's going to happen over the next 2-3 weeks. It's going to be a staggered, but yeah, by the end of July we'll have the results of the experience in both Nigeria and Rwanda. Those are the two first countries that are where trust is being rolled out in a kind of trial phase, but with real serial numbers from COVID vaccines, but in a more controlled fashion, let's say. Yeah. And similarly, just to add, the same way as Rwanda, the plan in Nigeria is to go beyond modality A, so beyond the app that we have in Trust, and incorporate the ability to send requests to the Trust system using the systems that are being developed locally in Nigeria.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this reply. And so with this, there are no question left in the Q&A box. So on this note, I am going to close this session. I would like to thank you, all of you presenters, for this very interesting presentation and for taking the time to reply to our participants' questions. Again, I will remind all participants that you will receive the link to the recording and presentation by email at the end of this webinar series. So on this note, I am closing this webinar. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to all our attendees for your participation and engagements. And we look forward to having you on another webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Have a rest of your day. Good.
You too. Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.